Welcome in. This is the North Side Baseball Podcast, episode 1, as we get things kicked off. Cubs in spring training, getting things rocking and rolling as well. I am Mitch Widmeier. He is Jason Ross. Jason, appreciate you jumping on to kind of get this podcast up and running. I was told, too, that, out of this group in the North Side Baseball Slack channel that we have, you're sort of the minor league baseball guy that everyone goes to. And a lot of your articles kind of circulate around premises with some of these prospects that the Cubs have. I know a lot of people are very intrigued with the farm system, especially in recent years as the Cubs have kind of shifted focus towards that and trying to draft and develop a lot of these guys that they hope pan out at the major league level. We're going to bounce around throughout this episode today of the Northside Baseball Podcast. But again, thanks for coming on. And I thought a good place to start, especially with you being on the show today, would be some of those prospects. And, we're not in April or May yet where the focus is primarily on the Cubs and how things are going. Right now in spring training, we're getting to see a lot of these prospects that will probably start in the minors, and then hopefully some of them have a shot as the year carries on or throughout the next 2-3 seasons. Who are a couple of those names that you're watching for that you think others should keep tabs on as well?
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me on today, Mitch. So thinking about some of the prospects that I'm kind of excited about, there's a couple of the more mainstream guys. I think you'd be hard pressed to not be excited about what you're seeing from somebody like Kevin Alcantara this spring training. And he's always been kind of a unicorn type prospect. There are 6'6" human beings, and there'll be another 6'6" human being I'll talk about here in a few minutes, but very rarely do they play center field. And a lot of times when you talk about a 6'6" guy, you're talking about somebody who, even if they're playing center field in the minors, they're not going to do it at the major league level. And Kevin Alcantara is capable of doing that at an above average ability. On top of that, you've got 30 home run power. He can steal 25, 30 bases. So you've got this kind of potential for the quote unquote 5-star prospect, right? He can do everything. He's a 5-tool guy. And he's really shown out in the spring. I'd love to see that a little bit more in Iowa. He does have a tendency to get beat up with fastballs. He's tall. That's one of the problems with being tall. One of the cool things about being tall is you've got extra leverage. One of the bad things about being 6'6" is that you have extra human being. And having extra human being means you've got to clear that body when you come through. And he can get beat up and in, as a lot of tall people can. But he also, there was a really cool home run that he hit in Arizona recently, and he got up and in on a fastball and absolutely turned on it. I think it was last year, and you just see where you can go. So he's somebody I think I'm excited about. He's probably one injury away for anybody in the outfield right now with Owen Casey on the shelf from being a starter. We got to see him for a few minutes in Chicago last year, and I think he's somebody that if he doesn't have a major league plate appearance by June 1st, we should all be excited about that in a weird way, because it means that it means Tucker's healthy, it means Suzuki's healthy, it means PCA is healthy, it means Happ is healthy. But if any of them go down before June 1st, I think he's your starter at almost any of those positions at the major league level. So he's somebody I'm very excited about. If you want to go a little deeper down the system, so maybe not somebody that you've got in your top 5, 6, 7, I think another spring training guy I'm excited about, I just wrote an article about him on Northside, is Ivan Bretower. Ivan Bretower is somebody I'm more excited I am today than I really probably should be. He's the 7th round draft pick. He's coming from UC Santa Barbara. It's an uphill battle for anybody with that kind of a draft pedigree. And that's not a negative. That's just the reality that, when you get drafted in the 7th round, there's a reason. And there's a reason you're not going in the first. But he's 6'6". He has 70 grade power. And that's not just my opinion. There's other people at the draft who had that. Joe Doyle thought that he was 5th round grade, that he slid to the 7th. But the reason I'm excited about it is if you've been paying attention to spring training, he had a 450 home run, 400-foot home run. It was 109 miles an hour off the bat. But I'm not excited about that. I'm excited that he showed up with better mechanics. I didn't realize how much I hated his swing at UC Santa Barbara, but I've gone back and I've looked at it, and it's like it's bad. It's bad Pete Alonso cosplay. He's got low hands, and he has a hand load And I don't know why, if you're 6'6", 250 pounds, you need to add any extra into your swing to get power out of it. Use your leverage, man. And the Cubs have moved that back. The hands look like they're further back. The elbow is in a more fixed position, so it's come up. And looking at his draft profile, the two things that were there was slow trigger, long swing. So how do you beat slow trigger, long swing? Hands back, create that natural rubber band effect with just moving your body forward and keeping that weight back. That was going to create that natural stretch anyways. And you can fire those hands off quicker. So he's not having that load, quicker decisions, quicker swing. And that swing was kind of the culmination of the ceiling. If you want Ivan Brettauer to be the guy that you can see as a 6'6", 250 pound guy who hits 40 home runs, that's the swing that you're going to have. Is he going to do that? Probably not. He's a 7th round pick. It's still a long way to go. He didn't even hit at Myrtle Beach last year when he first came up. So there's a long way to go, but he's somebody that I've been watching over the spring, and I'm pretty excited about him, more so than I have been in the past. I love those mechanics, and that swing was really pretty. And I'm excited to see what he does when we actually have real games that matter again.
Absolutely. I want to go back to Alcantara for a second here. Let's say things pan out, and even with a prospect like him who seems to be very, very close to getting to the major league level, like you said, Jason, perhaps just one injury away, which we don't want to see, but it would open a door potentially for someone like Alcantara. Long term, if he pans out and he is what the Cubs believe he is, where do you see him slotting into that outfield that has PCA in center, Happ in left, and at least for this year, Tucker and right? Do you see PCA staying in center for the long haul and maybe Alcantara moving to right, or how would you see that playing out?
I would say that there is zero reason to move Pete Cronstrong off of center field. A lot of times we talk about 80 grade skills. I think we overuse 80 grade skills. 80 grade is what we would consider to be almost, not just elite, but generational type stuff. And I think when we talk about Pete Crow Armstrong, we are talking legitimately 80 grade glove, 80 grade speed. Those things they're an injury away from going away. At any point, he suffers a major knee injury, he comes back, maybe that's not there anymore. But as he is today, he is a true 80 grade both of those. And as good as I think Kevin Alcantara is at center field, and I think, I would give him that above average major league grade as of today, that's not 80. So Pete's going to be our center fielder, but you can move up Alcantara to right field, and he's a Gold Glove type in right field, and he's got the power to be able to do it. He's got the glove to be able to do it. He's got the arm to be able to do it. So I think I think the best case for Kevin is that he's a center fielder. That's where he's a unicorn. You don't see the 6'6" in center field. You don't see that power potential in center field very often, unless maybe you're looking at like a Jose Siri, but Jose Siri couldn't hit the baseball outside of hitting home runs. But Kevin doesn't do that. Kevin has that ability to make barrel contact and do a little bit more than somebody like Jose Siri with the bat consistently. But as a right fielder, yeah, there's still a 4 or 5 win player there on your absolute ceiling. So I think you can kind of plug him in anywhere, and he's going to be good. The downside on it is if you want to be maybe pessimistic with the way that the Cubs operate, is that if Kevin comes up and he hits the ground running right away, that could be a reason that the Cubs would pass on keeping Tucker around.
I'm glad you said it. I'm glad you said it. I didn't have to.
Yeah, I'll say it. I think that's a real fear that people should have. I don't want to believe it. I wish that it wasn't true, but until the Cubs throw out the money to keep somebody like Kevin or keep Kyle, yeah. Kevin's success could be a reason why they would go away from that. So it's almost a little bit of a push and pull. You hope Kevin comes up and absolutely crushes it, but maybe the Cubs still want to keep Tucker around and can find an interesting way to keep both of them.
Just for full clarity too, whenever your people are watching or listening to this, a little peek behind the curtain, we're recording this on Tuesday early evening. And I don't know, Jason, if you saw earlier today when we talk about PCA and his glove and you coupled it by bringing up his speed, he got a late jump today in a spring training game, stealing first, trying to snag second base, still made it to second. The ball trickled away into shallow center field. PCA ended up scoring on the play. So it was crazy.
I saw the notification, but I haven't seen the play. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, I saw Marquis tweeted it out and put as their caption, PCA is chaos. I mean, just a simple play where the guy is on first, stealing second. When you watch it, Jason, he got a little bit of a late jump, but he still stole second easily. The ball just barely trickles away into shallow center. He immediately pops up, takes third, and then he's just watching, I think it was the shortstop, kind of nonchalantly go for the ball, and he's like, I'm gonna take home. I'm gonna give us a run on the board. And I mean, those are hard players to find. And so you talk about the defensive presence with PCA, but also the offensive side. I'm in full agreement with you. Like Alcantara's got a very high ceiling. You can't move PCA away from center, regardless. Correct?
No, not any bit. I don't know if there's anybody in Major League Baseball that you would move PCA off of center for. And I'm not trying to be like crazy with that, but I don't think that there's anybody who does what he does defensively in baseball outside of maybe like Brenton Doyle with the Rockies, who is actually, if you want to see like what PCA might be, Brenton Doyle is kind of a really weird kind of comparison there. Somebody who couldn't hit a lick his first year, had probably the weirdest StatCast page I've ever seen, where he was 99th percentile speed, 99th percentile defense, but 1% on like every hitting that was there. It was the weirdest StatCast page. He made some progress last year with the bat, but I think Brenton Doyle is like the only major leaguer that you would even consider moving off of center field for PCA. That would, maybe there's a debate, but yeah, he's unbelievable, and apparently he did more amazing things that I can't wait to see later today.
Yeah, it is the Northside Baseball Podcast. Mitch Widmeier, Jason Ross with you, kind of combing things over, looking at the landscape of the Chicago Cubs. We'll get into a little NL Central chatter later on in the show. Matt Shaw, he is a prospect that will be turned big leaguer, presumably playing the hot corner for the Cubs. Curious as to what you think, Jason, really how his game will translate. I want to more so look for this year and talk about this year more than the long run with Matt Shaw. I thought the Alex Bregman, it was fascinating, the storyline with Alex Bregman. If they would have brought him in, do you put Bregman at third, Shaw at second? Does that create a Nico Horner trade? There's a huge domino effect that would have taken place. It's no longer taking place, of course, because Bregman agreed to a deal with the Boston Red Sox. But I thought for Matt Shaw, there is a lot of hype surrounding Shaw before we've ever seen him, be the everyday third baseman for the Cubs. I thought if they would have brought in Bregman, it would have calmed that a little bit, because you would have had, like, for the fan base, bringing in Bregman, it's like, oh, look, there's another shiny new toy, like for the fan base to get excited about. I believe that not getting Bregman, I don't know if I want to use the word pressure, but I think expectations are already pretty high by the fan base for Matt Shaw, and then not getting Bregman, I think, could only enhance that. What are your expectations for him for this season? Again, assuming he's the third baseman on an almost everyday basis for the Cubs.
So I think talking about expectations is really important. And one of the things I thought about when I was thinking about talking about Matt Shaw was looking at the schedule at the beginning of the season. The Cubs open up in Japan against Yamamoto and Sasaki. And yes, Sasaki hasn't pitched an inning in Major League Baseball. He throws 99 miles an hour. He is a different beast than Matt Shaw's ever seen. Then they immediately play Arizona, right? And when you have Zach Allen, you've got Corbin Burns. So you're talking your very first 20 at-bats in Major League, 15 of them, 14 of them, 13, who cares? They're coming against some of the best pitchers, not in Major League Baseball, but on the planet, that he's never seen. And I think we should probably expect the first couple of weeks to be kind of rough. And that's not against Matt Shaw, but if you look at all of the best prospects in baseball, Jackson Holliday, Jackson Chourio, these just absolute stars. I mean, the best prospects in baseball came up and struggled. And Matt Shaw is a very good baseball prospect. Is he Jackson Holliday? I don't really know. The industry doesn't seem to think so. So if Holliday's allowed to struggle for, I think his first 24 bats, he had one hit. Yeah. And we should probably expect Shaw to struggle. The good news is I think he's going to be fine at the end of the season. I do think it's going to be an up and down. He's going to struggle a little bit. He's going to get on top of it. The league's going to readjust. And then he's going to have to readjust. And it's going to be a constant battle. But I think skill set wise, he has no red flags. There's no red flags. There's yellow flags. You can find yellow flags in his data. You can look at him and you can say, okay, he's got a big leg kick. What is the major league pitching going to do against that? I think it's a fair thing to wonder. He's kind of short. Is the power going to show? He doesn't really pull the ball a lot, and he kind of looks funny. He has a very weird little setup with his plate kind of mechanics. But sometimes major league players look funny. Jose Altuve is a short king who's looked funny his entire career. He's got a big leg kick, and you can make an argument at the end of the day he's going to go to the Hall of Fame. And I don't want to put Matt Shaw in the Hall of Fame category right now, but sometimes guys look funny and they don't do things the way that everybody else does. And if that's a yellow flag, so until he gets beat with the leg kick, if he can't handle that, then we can worry about that. But he made the most of his contact came against fastballs. He was making like almost 90% contact on fastballs. It was his highest highest WOBA in the minors. His weighted on base average was the highest against fastballs. The higher the velocity on the fastballs went. So if you looked at 95 plus, he was hitting still like 83% of contact on fastballs. So at this point, nobody's been able to beat him using any of the flaws against him. And I think we'll see that with Major League Pitching as well eventually. I think that he's a little over aggressive. I think Major League Pitching is going to work on that at first, but he showed last year that he can make those plate approachment adjustments. And the end of the day is this. He had a 140 WRC plus at AAA. That is unbelievable. That is as good as it gets. You couldn't ask for anything more. So I think how it translates even his first year, do I think he's going to struggle in April? Absolutely. At the end of the year, if he really came on in those last couple of months and he was somebody who had a 115 WRC plus, he was 15% better than league average. He was a slightly average to maybe even slightly above average fielder at third base who stole 25 bags on the season, who hit 18 home runs on the year. I think that's all really possible for him to do. And I like the way that he came in last year and he said, hey, you know what? I crushed the baseball in my first year, but my approach isn't right. And he doubled his walk rate and kept his strikeouts in more than enough of a low ability, all while not needing to do that. When you hit as well as he did his first year, you don't need to make those changes mentally. But he did, and he took to it right away. And so I feel confident that even when Major League Pitching finds those holes, that he's going to be able to have the wherewithal to think, all right, where are my flaws? How can I fix my game? And how can I get back on top of them?
Well, how do you think, I want to hit on one of your points, actually. One of the downsides, I think, to the Tokyo series outside of the start times, if you're watching, obviously
they're going to be brutal
in the United States, but you bring up a really fascinating point, Jason. Like, the Cubs are going to get two of the best from the Dodgers. And obviously it's the first series of the year for the Cubs, but it also is for Major League Baseball. And then a little over a week later, you've got Arizona, but Arizona hasn't played yet. So you're getting two of the best from the Dodgers, and then you're getting the best from Arizona, who will just be opening up their campaign. So it's almost like a murderer's row. You're starting with Yamamoto, Sasaki, and then Corbin Burns and Zach Allen. I mean, Arizona, too, credit to them. I liked their pitching staff entering the offseason for them to just push it more forward and say, we're going to go out and get a guy like Corbin Burns. Like, that won't be easy for anyone in the Cubs lineup, let alone a rookie with, at least externally on the outside, there are definitely lofty expectations from the fan base, I would assume, circulating inside that clubhouse. Even for Matt Shaw himself, he has big expectations, big goals that he has set in place. How do you think his glove plays at the hot corner at the major league level? I don't know if it was you, but I'm pretty sure I saw someone on the website on Northside Baseball. I might be slightly paraphrasing, but I thought there was an article that I saw this week that said, like, does Matt Shaw's glove even matter, because they were hyping up the offense so much? How do you think his glove plays at the hot corner?
So that was definitely not me, because I think his glove matters. But actually, you know what? I think I've come around. If you would have asked me how his glove handled at third base on draft day, all to be completely honest, I like Tommy Troy more in the draft than Matt Shaw originally. I will tell you that today, I believe I was wrong. A year and a half ago, I like Matt Shaw's game more than I realized. I try to come back and at least be honest when I'm wrong about things. But looking at his game, it sounds like he has worked really, really hard to become a third baseman. He went out to the Premier 12, which is, it's a tournament, and there's up and down in terms of competition levels. You're playing some of these countries and they don't have anybody who's going to end up at a professional traditional Major League North American league. And then you've got some Japanese players out there. Seiya Suzuki took part in it before he came over to America. So it's this weird kind of competition where you've got like top prospects, you've got professionals who play out in the Japanese league, in the NPB. But he set records in terms of his bat, but also Mike Scioscia was raving about his glove at third base. Said he played the entire thing at third base. There were a couple of highlights there, and I don't want to read too much into a highlight. A highlight always makes you look really good, and when we talk those, it's kind of a sizzle reel. Yeah, you're always going to look good in a highlight. That's what a highlight is.
Yeah.
But he worked all off season at third base. And then if we want to appeal to authority a little bit, I think the Cubs deserve a little bit of appeal to authority. They've taken Nico Horner, who didn't have the strongest arm. They played him at shortstop plus defender. They took Nick Madrigal and they put him at third base, which at the time I remember talking about it and saying there's no way this is going to work. Plus defender at third base. And
even with hopping into his throws.
Even with hopping into his throws, right? Yeah. So he's still scoring well on StatCast defense, despite the fact that he's 5'2" and he's literally bunny hopping halfway across the field. So I think when we add it all up, I think that there's the potential for at least an average glove at third base. Do I think he's going to win a Gold Glove there? Probably not. I don't think we're going that far, but would it be shocking? Probably not the craziest thing. If Nick Madrigal can become a plus defender at third base, Matt Shaw could become a plus defender at third base. It's not something I would bank on today. They didn't fix Christopher Morel there. If you want to go the opposite way, Christopher Morel has all of the physical tools to play third base and can't. And he's proved that plenty. So it's not, they don't bat 1,000 on that. But I think that there's enough to believe that the Cubs work well at third base. I think there's enough to believe in Shaw's game. He moves pretty well. He's athletic. He's got a strong enough arm. He played shortstop in college. So there's an arm there. And, I think there's a debate as to whether how much does arm strength really matter anywhere. It can matter on some individual plays, but I think if you look kind of broad spectrum, maybe it's not as big of a deal as we think about it. It's talking about Nick Madrigal and his bunny hops. So I think glove wise that he has the ability to be a plus defender, at least in somewhat, like a somewhat plus, like average to slightly above average seems possible.
By the way, the title of the article was, it was last week on northsidebaseball.com. Does Matt Shaw's defense even matter? And it was not, in fact, written by you, Jason. So
yes,
you're in the clear on that. I didn't write it either, but yeah, I was curious about that. It's the Northside Baseball Podcast. Mitch Widmeier, Jason Ross, with you. However you get your podcast, appreciate you tuning in. Cade Horton, another prospect. I've been tracking him like crazy the last couple of years. Former first-round pick. Injuries derailed his 2024 season. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he logged less than 40 innings. Saw recently he faced live hitters for the first time since last June. So certainly a long, long road back for Cade Horton. I do wonder, and it's not really even worth wondering because we'll never know, but if not for the shoulder injury last year, could he have potentially been in the mix for a rotation spot this spring? Like, I think that's on the table. It's almost, undoubtedly that he's going to start in the minors this season. It'd be, foolish coming off that shoulder injury for them to have any other expectations besides that. What do you think the season will hold for Cade Horton? What sort of are the expectations now following the injury? Do you think the Cubs have maybe pivoted on their thoughts, or could he still be a guy that slots in near the top of a rotation if he's able to gain that same form pre-injury?
I would say that, if we're really looking at why the Cubs drafted Cade Horton in the 9th spot, in going back on it, they drafted him to be a starting pitcher, and you don't take a reliever there. You take somebody who's a starter, you think can be a starter with a fallback option of being an important arm in the bullpen if you need to. Last year's shoulder injury was not great, but also it's not as devastating maybe it needs to be to take him out of the rotation talk forever. I do think, as you nailed it, he's not going to start. He's not in the rotation talk right now. And I think that's okay. My expectations for Cade in 2025 is that we're going to see him start in Iowa. And I would expect his first month or so, maybe his first 3 weeks, he goes out there and he has like a hard limit of like 45 pitches. He's going out there for 2 innings at a time, because my guess is that there's a cap of innings. Maybe 130 to 150 innings tops, right? That's the most we're going. We're going to jump from 40. I think even maybe 130 might be high, but I'm trying to remain optimistic. I don't think the Cubs want to waste the bullets in Iowa. I kind of have a feeling that had things gone well last year and he'd been healthy, I kind of think he would have been in Chicago in the middle of the summer. I think he was ready earlier than that. I know when he got to Iowa, the fastball readings weren't great. The lower velocity, not great movement. There was an article that came out on The Athletic, I think it was yesterday, on it, where Sharma and Mooney talked about he came in very stiff. He had stiffness in his mechanics, and I think that kind of maybe added to the shoulder injury, took away from the velocity movement, kind of mechanical things. I'm hoping that that's kind of worked out. They said that he was hitting 95 to 97 just 2 days ago at Live BP. So you have to feel like, maybe we're back there. So if you've got the 95 to 97, you've got the slider, you've got the changeup, which is actually a pretty good pitch. He's really worked hard on that. You've got the curveball, you've got a 4-pitch mix. That's a starter. I don't think he's going to start much this year with the Cubs. I think best bet is August. The Cubs ramp him up over the course of the first 4 months to maybe get into 4 to 5 innings per in June. Maybe he comes in July to August to September as a starter if you really need it. But I kind of have a feeling that he's going to Adam Wainwright this season. He's going to be a guy who he starts in the minors, you use his innings, but you start to get to that kind of hard cap of like, I really don't want to push him too much this year. So what if he's a 7th, 8th inning guy to lead up to Presley, to lead up to Hodge or whatever, however the bullpen's shaken out, where his fastball slider plays so well there. And he becomes an important cog in that aspect to get you down the stretch, to really shorten games up, especially in the playoffs where, things get a little bit different in the playoffs. You can shorten games up with Cade, and then maybe next year he's in the rotation. What are you thinking, Mitch?
I like that plan. I mean, can you imagine the Cubs if, the summer rolls around, and I think most would expect them to be right in the thick of things, if not leading the division, hopefully this year. And you can add a Cade Horton who, if all goes according to plan, if he does start the season in Iowa, and you can add him as a bullpen piece with the recognition that the long-term plan is still in play for him to be a starting pitcher, but you can get him, get his toes wet a little bit, put his feet in the sand at the major league level as a bullpen arm. I love that idea. Again, we're hoping, assuming, fingers crossed type stuff, that there's no more injury setbacks and that he sort of hits the ground running, or at least, gets his feet on steady ground at some point this year in the minor league system. Just brutal injury. And, you're talking about a pitcher coming back from a shoulder injury. And we said, he hadn't faced hitters since last June. It's a long road back for Cade Horton. So I think looking at it with tunnel vision and kind of the short term would be not the wise thing to do if you're the Cubs or a fan of the Cubs. This is still going to be a situation where they sort of ease him along the way. Like I would be surprised if the Cubs, let's say there's injuries to the bullpen or just, multiple injuries to the rotation. I still don't think Cade would be an option for them early in the season, that they would feel panicked and pressed to turn to Cade Horton. This is not a guy that you bring up for this year. This is a guy that you plan around for the years to come as really a focal point and maybe a pillar of your pitching staff. That's why I like your plan of, if all goes according to plan, bring him up this summer, in a bullpen role, with the understanding that that's not going to be his full-time gig or the plan for the organization moving forward. So I am all for that. Hoping that things go well for him. It's a long time to be down for any pitcher, let alone someone who was, he was rolling along too at the minor league level. So one thing too I wanted to talk about, Jason, the kind of ties in, obviously Cade Horton not going to be a candidate for it, but that 5th spot in the rotation, I had an article posted a couple weeks back. In an ideal world, I would love to see Ben Brown run away with the gig this spring. I don't expect that to happen in terms of him like running away with it, like where he's just lights out stellar, and whether it's Colin Ray or Assad, who was dealing with an injury, as of a couple of weeks ago, or whoever else is in contention, like to just falter or, curl up, and while Ben Brown just ascends, I would expect there to be heavy competition for the 5th spot in the rotation. But to me, ideal world, I would like to see Ben Brown get the gig. There's a couple of reasons why, and one of them doesn't even factor in Ben Brown, the pitcher. I think with Colin Ray, like you have a veteran presence there, but we know who he is at this point. Like it's a decent floor, but the ceiling is what it is at this point with Colin Ray. Like there is nothing that Colin Ray is going to show the Cubs this year that they don't already know about Colin Ray, the pitcher. And he'll give you innings. He's a decent starting pitcher, but he was forced into a heavier role with Milwaukee last year because of all of their injuries in their starting rotation. They had rookie DL Hall go down. Brandon Woodruff never pitched for them. They had injury after injury after injury in that rotation. And so Colin Ray was sort of the innings eaters. There were even starts where Ray, was knocked around a little bit early on, but they would keep him in through 4 or 5, 6 innings just because they needed length out of him. And then when the postseason rolled around, he wasn't even on their playoff roster for their series against the New York Mets. And it sounds like I'm just, raining down on Colin Ray. I'm not. I just like the promise, the intrigue of Ben Brown. I do think one thing going against him is right now he really only has 2 established pitches. That's tough to do if you're a starting pitcher in the majors. But for me, in an ideal world, Javier Assad, innings eater, maybe he's your long relief guy out of the bullpen once he's good to go. Ray I don't want a 6-man rotation. Maybe you find a spot in the bullpen for him, although I don't think he'd be too thrilled with that. I wanted and was hoping that Ben Brown would have every chance to win the 5th spot. That's still my hope as spring carries on. I do think at some point this season, and maybe the Cubs flirt with the idea of starting him in the bullpen as maybe he works on trying to really nail home a 3rd pitch to add to his arsenal. So ideal world for me, it's Ben Brown. I don't know how realistic that is as spring carries along, but I would like to see him get a shot at least to get the 5th spot.
Oh yeah, I think Ben Brown. I think Jordan Wicks is another name that I would love to see get a chance. The one thing that I will say is this on Colin Ray. Colin Ray eats innings. He will pitch, and early on in the season, I think you could make an argument that having somebody like Colin Ray, who isn't going to go out there and give you amazing innings, but he's going to go out there and he's going to give you innings regardless, is almost a good thing with the way that the Cubs young pitchers are. Ben Brown missed most of the season last year. So when we talk about Cade Horton not getting a lot of innings, Ben Brown didn't get a lot of innings.
Yeah.
You know who else didn't get a lot of innings? Jordan Wicks didn't get a lot of innings. You know who got a lot of innings the last 2 years? Colin Ray.
Yep.
And that's not necessarily always a great thing to have Colin Ray, because the Brewers, I think over the last 2 years when they won the division, he had the 2nd most innings pitched, any Brewers pitcher. So you can win the NL Central with Colin Ray picking up innings. The Brewers have proven it. Now, do I think they won the division because of Colin Ray? Absolutely not. There is so many other reasons why they won the division, but you can do it. And I would guess that if you ask the Cubs what their perfect world is that Colin Ray comes in and he pitches probably as the number 5 for the first couple of months. You let Ben Brown and Jordan Wicks, who needs to really work on his slider shape. His slider shape just wasn't all that great last year. He showed up with a new slider. Matt wrote a great article on Northside about it, and about how maybe giving him a death ball akin to like Ben Brown would really work out. Ben Brown is somebody who he's spent 2 of the last 3 years he's been hurt. The good news is that the injury seems like it was actually a weird bone thing, and it wasn't like a fracture. It was something that should be non-chronic, but he missed a lot of time these last couple of years. So maybe again, another person who just kind of needs to build his time up, and having somebody like Colin Ray who you can do that with is great. The guy I'm actually the most bummed about being hurt right now is Brandon Birdsell, who is he's somebody who I didn't realize how much I liked him until I super dug into the numbers. He's a 5th round pick out of Texas Tech. A lot of times that's like pitchability guy. And I kind of always thought he might have been more of a pitchability guy. I've watched him a lot, but I always thought he's got a funky delivery. You don't always get really great readouts on velocity at the lower levels. And then I dug into his AAA numbers, and he was getting well above league average whiffs, well above league average chase. He's got a great slider. He's got a really funky delivery. He's got a good fastball that sits 94, 95, 96, 97, pretty consistent. He's been working on a cutter as the season wore on. He's added a cutter so he can attack lefties. I was really excited about him getting in that number 5 race. And I thought, I didn't think he was going to be able to beat Colin Ray in April. But he could have been one of those guys in Iowa who was right there. And if Colin Ray struggled right off the bat, Birdsell gets off to a good run. with an injury or Ray's bad, he would have been the next guy up. And him coming into camp hurt really bummed me out. I was excited to see him in Arizona and what he looked like against, even if it's spring training. I try not to be too results based on that, but just kind of visually get an idea to see him. And that's another guy I think throughout the year will surprise people. I kind of had a up-down organizational grade on him for a while, and then I dug into the numbers and I came away and I said, if you really look at the data and you look at what he's done, that's a guy who could be a high 4, a low 3, somebody who could sit in that mid rotation spot, and he doesn't just have to be your number 5. Will he get there? We'll see. But he's got a good slider. He's got a good fastball. He's got such a funky delivery. He is a really funky guy to watch. Where the way he throws from such a short arm angle that I think you'll look at it. His extension's probably not going to be great, but I think that on the opposite way, his fastball plays up because it's such a weird angle that hitters get thrown off on him. So I think you're right in terms of like best case versus realistic. So I think realistic is Colin Ray's the guy, but the best case is that throughout the year, the Cubs are going to have at some point throughout the year, Birdsell, Brown, Wicks, and Horton, who could all make arguments to be in the rotation over him. And those are all guys who are better than number 5 pitchers. So I think, if you're really hoping that the Cubs find a pitcher, like they go out and they trade for a Dylan Cease, that would be awesome. That would be great. But the next best case is that the Cubs have one of these young pitchers who makes a strive, like Jordan Wicks with the death ball. Cade Horton comes back healthy. Ben Brown's healthy. Brett Birdsell's healthy. Then all of a sudden, boom, maybe your number 3 is actually in the system, and we just haven't seen a lot of them yet.
I'll say too, for Colin Ray, like that's a damn good number 5 starter to have in a rotation. I think with Milwaukee, he at points in time last year was their number 2, number 3 in the rotation. Mm-hmm. That's asking a lot. But if Colin Ray's your 5th starter, you have to feel good about where your rotation's at. And like you said, he's an innings eater, veteran, not a guy that's going to complain about his role. Like Colin Ray's a good guy to have in that clubhouse. I'm curious what you think. Let's say Colin Ray is steady in spring and it's clear that he's going to get that 5th spot in the rotation. Could you see a scenario where the Cubs entertain, like if Ben Brown is really good, could they start him in the bullpen instead of the rotation? It's a guy who I think 15 games last year. I'll have to check. I think it was 15 games last year, 8 starts. Obviously, long-term, I always view him as a rotation piece. Jason, I can't get the start. It was either late, I think it was in May. It was either late May or early June. That start that Ben Brown had against Milwaukee, 7 innings, no hits, double-digit strikeouts. And it was like, oh my gosh. And I know that's a super small sample size. It's 1 start. But he was so dang dominant in that start against the Brewers. I was like, I want to see this guy stay healthy, be a part of the rotation. And obviously, the injury bug bit him hard last year. But could you see a scenario where Ben Brown maybe stays with the Cubs, starts in the bullpen instead of the rotation, or no?
I would say as of right now, no.
Okay.
And I don't think it's because of Ben Brown, but I think if you look at the way that the injuries have kind of stacked up with the Cubs, if I'm predicting out just kind of the whole rotation and bullpen, you figure the rotation is going to be Imanaga, Steele, Boyd, Tyon, and Ray. And then if you look at the bullpen, I think the bullpen's already set. And the bullpen's pretty settled between guys like Brazier and Presley. You've got Hodge, you've got Tealbar, you've got Tyson Ross, you've got Eli Morgan. I think those 8 are already kind of set in stone. And then behind them, you've got about 4 guys who are kind of really looking for somebody to get hurt. That's Julian Merriweather, somebody like Keegan Thompson. These guys who are kind of right there. Maybe Daniel Palencia, if he can kind of settle up a little bit. You got maybe like 4 guys who are fighting for that spot. But if the Cubs have an injury to their rotation right now, you've got Javier Assad who's going to start on the injured list in some way or rehabbing. You've got Cade Horton who's not available. You've got Jordan Wicks who's also working back from an injury. And my guess he's working on switching some of those secondaries up. So if you have an injury, let's say Matthew Boyd, who's got a long list of injuries in his career. Yeah. And while I think the Tommy John you can make a really good argument that Tommy John's fixed it all. But let's say he gets hurt April 15th, who you going to? And you have to look at Iowa at that point and be like, well, I'm going to Jordan Wicks right now. He pitched 4 times last year, or 5 times, or how many pitched. Is that the guy? Do I really want to go to him right now? Or would it be really nice to have Ben Brown stretched out in Iowa in that first little bit before you get Javier Assad back, before you get Brandon Birdsell back, when that depth comes up, and then maybe in middle of May, you're looking and Tyson Ross just isn't missing the bats that he had been, or Porter Hodge loses the control. I love Porter Hodge, but he's had control issues in the past, and you want to move one of these guys down to the minor leagues, or somebody gets hurt. Well, then you can transition Ben Brown to the bullpen, and you'll feel a little bit better about having some depth in the rotation in that case there's an injury. I just think right now, if Assad was healthy, if Birdsell was healthy, you could make an argument. Yeah, Ben Brown's could really push somebody out of the bullpen. But I think the Cubs, if you look at the way the Cubs acted all offseason, they collected pitchers like they were Pokemon. They collected every single one they could, right? Every single pitcher they could. If somebody got DFA'd and they had any connection to Tyler Zombro, their new head of pitching, they were picking them up. They've churned through pitchers like Rob Zastrinsky and David Festa and all of these kind of like fringe pitchers. I don't think that they would DFA somebody like Brad Keller. I have a feeling Brad Keller is going to find his way onto the pitching staff with the way he's looked right now, that I think they'll keep somebody like him around and then be able to churn through those guys throughout the season and keep their depth a little bit at the beginning of the season. Also, why I think Colin Ray is going to hit that 5 spot. It's kind of like a depth thing. These are guys you can clear out later when you feel a little bit better about things. And at the beginning of the season, that depth really matters.
100%. I agree with that. I should have phrased my question as, do you believe the Cubs and do you believe Ben Brown projects as a starter or a bullpen guy for the long run? Because I have actually seen people make the case for him if he, really, I don't want to use the word perfects, but if he really dominates with that 2-pitch mix but never really establishes a third pitch, could he be a bullpen guy? But obviously, if the plan is to have him as a starter, or at least you want to give that a go, starting him in the bullpen wouldn't make a lot of sense because, he's not going to be out there every day pitching. You'd rather see him get those starting innings in Iowa. Do you see him, though, as a long-term starter?
My hope is that he's a starter. I have a feeling he's going to end up in the bullpen, and not even for pitch mix. I think if you look at his mechanics, he throws way over the top, and I think long term, I don't know what that's going to do to his arm. He does not have what I would consider to be like a really clean delivery for like long-term health. There's some concern there. And I know Matt's written an article about it in the past. And if you have some concerns about him long-term, you have to ask yourself, what is more important? Is it good to get 180 innings out of Ben Brown for a couple of seasons, and then maybe he's looking at a Tommy John, or even more like it's a shoulder issue, it's a the thoracic outlet, which are really terrible for pitchers. One of those things that could really develop from bad mechanics. Or is it better to have somebody I can put in the 8th and the 9th inning, 60 innings every season? The guy's healthy. He's deathballing guys left and right, and he's shortening games up. I have a feeling that he'll end up there. But my hope is that you've got a starting pitcher, because if you've got a starting pitcher with his stuff, that's a guy who's going to strike out 27% of the hitters that he sees every season. And he did this last year coming off of AAA, where he was bad. I mean, he was not good at AAA. He had struggled for strikes. He is hurt. He didn't look good. He didn't look great. It was all up and down. And then he comes out in the last year just out of the gates, and he looked amazing. So the stuff is clearly there to be a starter. My hope is starter. My brain says I think he's a bullpen guy down the road, but my heart is really hoping that the guy's a starter, because he'd be great.
I'm right there with you, man. It's the Northside Baseball Podcast. Mitch Widmeier, Jason Ross with you. This is the first rendition of an Every Year podcast. Appreciate you clicking the play button. I'll let you take the lead on this one, and then I'll give my thoughts. I'm just curious to kind of pick your brain first. Cubs, serious contenders this year, yes or no? And you can take it and run with it however you want, whether that's in terms of the division, in terms of a pennant race. Obviously, if you talk World Series, that seems a little optimistic, a lot optimistic. But Cubs, contenders, division, NL, how do they stack up? Where do they stack up? What are your thoughts on that, Jason?
I think if we're being realistic, if we look at the projections, if we're looking at things like Pecota, if we're looking like Zips, if we're looking on paper, I think on paper, they're the division favorites today. You can kind of debate on how much of a favorite are they. Are they like bang on favorites like the Braves or the Dodgers who are just really in that upper tier? Probably not. I think there's plenty of permeations where the Cubs are an 81 win team who don't make the playoffs. They've got, if they get the right injuries at the right time, if a couple of these guys underperform, there's negative variance that slides them down the scale. I think if we're being realistic, I think the realistic answers are sitting somewhere between 85 wins and 88 wins today. They also have a lot of prospects in Iowa, and they can't keep them all. They can't. They realistically cannot keep them all. They have $25 million under the luxury tax today. They seem connected to nobody else. So they're going to go probably into the season with most of that. Even if they make a small signing between now and then, they're going to go into the season with most of that. And even with Tom Ricketts, who doesn't like to open up the paycheck, that means that the Cubs can basically, in July, once the deadline comes, the Cubs can trade for whoever they want to trade for. Whether that's a controllable player, whether it's a guy who's about to finish his 1 year contract and become a free agent like Vlad Guerrero. I don't want to speculate on the name, but they can add to, and I think they can add more so than other teams, and not all teams, because I think the Reds and the Brewers have some players in the minors that they could move on, but the Reds and the Brewers are a little bit more maybe conservative with some of those prospects. They have to be at times, whereas I think the Cubs are in a place where even if they want to be conservative, they probably have to make decisions like Shaw or Triantos, Alcantara or Casey, because I don't think that they can all fit. At some point, you kind of have to pick your favorite and go from it. They have a lot of pitching. They've got Ben Brown. They've got Jordan Wicks. They've got Cade Horton. Do they keep them all? Do they move some of them? And then you've got guys behind them who can maybe push some things. So I think they're probably an 85 to 88 win team who can go to that 90 plus range if things work out well, if they stay healthy, and if they make a trade at the deadline. In terms of the National League, Zips had them at one point like as the third best team in the National League. I'd love to believe that, but I think you can make arguments that the Phillies have a really good team. They've got a great rotation. They've got Bryce Harper. They've got guys who can hit. Can they field the ball enough? I don't know. The Mets are kind of in a weird place right now. They're hitting a lot of pitching injuries right now. And so on one hand, you'd say, well, they've lost Montas. They've lost Widmeier, I think, went down the day too. They've lost a couple pitchers. That's bad for them. But does that make them trade for Dylan Cease? And then how do we recontextualize that in terms of where they're at? So I would say the Braves and the Dodgers, they're 1-2. I think there's a bunch of teams that you can mix in that 3 spot. The Phillies, the Mets, the Cubs.
I would throw the Diamondbacks in there too.
Yeah, the Diamondbacks or Arizona's another team. You could make until the Padres trade somebody. The Padres probably deserve a talk there. World Series, the baseball's weird in the playoffs. I think like 53% of the time, the number 1 seed wins anyways, especially when you add in the new playoffs. And I mean, last year was crazy. And I think we're going to see more of that. The more teams you get in the playoffs, the more crazy outcomes. On the back end, the Dodgers are really good. It'd be ridiculous to say that anybody's going to have a better chance than the Dodgers right now. I think I'm optimistic. This is the best Cubs teams that they probably put on paper since 2018, 2019, depending on how you feel about the team going into 2019. This is probably the best team that they've put on paper. I think there's a lot of upside on the team. There's still some negative variance. Things could go wrong. If Dansby Swanson gets hurt, what are they going to do? Play Nicky Lopez at shortstop? That's going to be rough. But I think you can play that game for a lot of teams. If you take out any team's 4-win player and you say, okay, who's next up? You're probably looking at Nicky Lopez for whatever team you're talking about. So, there's ways like that. I do think it's going to be a really good division, though. I think the Cubs are good. I think the Brewers, you can never count them out. They've got the Cardinals magic going on right now, where they can go in with Colin Ray as their number 2 pitcher, and then they still win 88 games. And I don't know how they do it, but they do it. They take any catcher on the planet, and all of a sudden he's the best defensive catcher on the planet. It doesn't matter who it is. They're great. And they have this kind of magic behind them. The Pirates have Paul Skeens and some really good prospects, and they could really, I don't think they're going to win the division. I think they can make it annoying for the division. And then you have the Reds, who have great pitching. They had a lot of shortstops and hitters. They kind of I think maybe some prospect fatigue and some injuries and some weird steroid stuff kind of knocked those guys down a little bit. But I think the Reds could win 82, 83 games on a good season for them, especially if like somebody like Rhett Lauder or Nick Lodolo like really like break out throughout the season. They could be really good. I think it's going to be a really fun NL Central this year, which I can't remember who I was talking to recently, but as a fan, I'd almost rather the Cubs be a 90-win team than a 110-win team because I get to care about every game throughout the summer. I might not get a World Series at the end of it, but when the Cubs walk off the Brewers or the Reds on June 19th, I get to care a lot about that more than the Dodgers fan. So I think everybody in the NL Central is up for a really fun season. What do you think about the Central this year, Mitch?
Yeah, the only team you didn't mention was the Cardinals, and I would say rightfully so. Like I don't know what their direction is. Like last off season, they go and add a ton of veteran pitchers and, flirted around a little bit the first couple months, found a little bit of group, but like you never felt, I don't know, from the Brewers' perspective last year, at different times teams were creeping up towards them, but they never really felt threatened. And like you said, the Brewers to me, like the Cubs get Kyle Tucker, and I think most would objectively look at that and say the Cubs just added a top 15 player in baseball, and that's a huge addition, especially when you don't have to give up. You gave up a good prospect, you gave up Paredes at third, and Wisniewski, but you're not giving up premium talent, at least now, to get a premium bat like Kyle Tucker.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to, obviously goes without saying, be huge for them. The NL Central to me is somewhat similar to the American League Central for me. Like if you, in this sense, Jason, if you told me, hey, Cleveland's going to win the American League Central this year, I'd be like, that doesn't surprise me. If you told me Detroit won the AL Central this year, I'd be like, doesn't surprise me. Kansas City doesn't surprise me. If you told me the Brewers won it this year, I'd be like, yeah, that's not shocking. Cubs, same thing. I actually do like the Pirates. I think they're maybe a year or two away from really scaring the rest of the division. But again, if you told me, hey, the Pirates won 85 to 87 games this year, I would not be surprised in the slightest.
Wouldn't be crazy.
The Brewers, though, they're like the Grim Reaper. Like I look at them and I'm like, they just lost Willy Adames to San Francisco, Devin Williams to New York. They bring back Nestor Cortez, which is a decent rotational piece when he's healthy, when he's at his best. And I look at that, I'm like, wow, losing Williams and Willy Adames is huge. But then I look at last year and it's like, Brandon Woodruff didn't pitch an inning for them. They had just traded Corbin Burns to Baltimore. Christian Yelich missed most of the season, including the entire second half in the postseason. They still won the division. Like it doesn't matter who the Brewers have in their lineup, in their rotation, who's healthy, who's not. They're always, like you said, they're on that Cardinals sort of run where they're just always going to be there. I do think the expectations. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, the guy I'm actually the most worried about that you got was that short second baseman from the Yankees, Durbin. That guy is the most Brewers player that I have ever seen. I had done some work on him as the Cubs have been talking about Bellinger and some guys that I was maybe like kind of excited about, maybe they were weird, and I came across him. And if you want just from a Brewers thing as a Cubs, the guy I'm the most afraid that you guys got, it's not Nestor Cortez. That guy screams Brewers, and he screams like he's going to absolutely haunt the Cubs for the next 6 years. He's like 5'6", makes a ton of contact. He's fast. He's come out of nowhere, and I think he's the guy I'm the most worried about. It's the weirdest thing, but the Brewers have this magic with those kinds of like short king middle infielders that just feels like they kill me. So from a Brewers fan, I look into him. I think you guys are going to really enjoy him.
Yeah. I am not a Brewers fan, by the way.
Not a Brewers fan.
I live in Wisconsin, but not a Brewers fan. The Brewers though are just, I covered them for work. That's why I'm very familiar.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, with them, but they have like up and down the roster guys that you would say those are Brewers guys for whatever, like Sal Frelick, Joey Ortiz, like the list goes. Bryce Terang. It's like these are just, they're like thorns in the side of the rest of the division. Like you forget about these guys if you're not a Brewers fan. And then when the Cubs have a 3-game set at Wrigley and Bryce Terang over a 3-game stretch, like steals 4 bases, or Joey Ortiz has like a couple of infield hits that just, or Sal Frelick, I should say, just drives you insane. So you can't count out the Brewers. I do think though, for the Cubs, and every year I feel like around this time as spring training starts, every fan base wants to believe their team. Like you find a way, you find a roadmap where it ends with, hey, this is how my team gets to the playoffs. This is how my team wins the division. But I will say for the first time in maybe 4 or 5 years, like the Cubs should have expectations of, we should win the division. Like Milwaukee's going to be there. Pittsburgh or Cincinnati, I think one of them will at least be in that spot where they're not going to completely go away. St. Louis, I do think, is still a mess, which sounds crazy to say.
Yes.
Like, if you would have asked us that 6-7 years ago, I would have just always assumed the Cardinals are always going to be good. They're always going to be in contention, but I think they're well off. But the Cubs, it should be, we should win the division this year. If you zoom out the microscope, one layer further back, like you said, Jason, no one is in the same stratosphere in the National League to me as the Dodgers. The Mets spent a lot of money. The Mets also, I think, wanted to go with the 6-man rotation. You mentioned already the injuries to Frankie Montas and Sean Manaea. That's going to severely hinder some of those plans for the Mets. Now, I don't know if they're short-term, long-term for both of those guys. I think Montas was a bit longer, but either way, the Mets offense could make up for some of that. I don't think anyone's in the same galaxy as the Dodgers, including the Cubs. There's just something to me like, if they would have got Bregman, I think it would have inspired more confidence. Not that they got Bregman, but that this front office also viewed this how the fans are. Like, they're ready now. Like, you might only have 1 year of Kyle Tucker. And so I think the front office and Jed, they made some of those moves, but they also worked around the margins a lot. Like, let's say, Jason, they didn't trade for Kyle Tucker. I think people would have been looking at this offseason as you got a lot of you got a lot of average guys, So the Kyle Tucker part's huge. I do think the goal this year should be the National League Central. We are talking about the Cubs who haven't made the playoffs since the shortened season, the COVID shortened season. So if you can win the division, I believe even if it were a win the division one and done, the fans would be somewhat happy with that. Like just getting back, just getting an invite to the dance.
Yeah. I think they have to win a couple of playoff games.
Correct.
I think
if you win the division, you get swept.
Yeah,
that's no one's chalking that up as, hey, you know what? It was still a pretty fun year. Like, I don't think so. So I agree with you on that front. But yeah, the goals, and I think they are in place for the Cubs. Like, you should be right there to win the National League Central. And if you look at most of the betting markets, I was looking at FanDuel earlier. They have the Cubs as -105 as the favorite to win the division. Now, it's not like, I don't know what the Dodgers are, but if the Dodgers are like -700 or 800 to win the NL West, it's not going to surprise me. But I think in terms of like breaking down tiers of the National League, the Cubs are probably, to me, in that third tier. I don't put them with the Dodgers. I personally also don't put them right now with the Braves. I would lump in the Phillies there, and I really do like the Diamondbacks on paper. And then I think below that, maybe the Cubs are sort of in that third tier. But in terms of the division, absolutely, there should be no doubt about, like, man, are the Cubs going to be in this thing when the calendar turns from August to September? Like, the thought should be they should be leading it. The Brewers are pesky, and the Brewers are always going to be there. But the Brewers didn't make moves this offseason that are inspiring faith in that fan base, that front office is, full throttle, pedal to the metal right now. The Cubs at least did that with the trade for Kyle Tucker. So if they miss the playoffs this year, you're going to have a fan base that's boiling over with rage, because then the attention shifts to, we didn't even make the playoffs, and now what happens with Kyle Tucker?
Yeah.
So I do think there's going to be some internal pressure to, whether it's the wild card or division, at least get to the playoffs. And like you said, it's one thing to get there. If you get there and you're embarrassed, even if it's one of those, best of three series or whatever, you gotta scoop up a win or two.
Yeah,
the playoffs. Winning a series would be great too, obviously.
Yeah, they've got to win at least one game in the playoffs. They haven't won a playoff game since 2017, and if they go to the playoffs, that which always kills me. That's a real statistic, because 2018 was the debacle down the, and it's not even really a debacle. The Brewers just took it away from them, and I give them a lot of credit. But the Cubs then blew that game against the Brewers, blew the game against the Rockies. 2019. No playoffs. 2020 swept out of the playoffs. It's been a while. They have to win a playoff game. If they can win one playoff game, especially if it's at Wrigley, then I think even if the other two games are close and they don't come away with it, I think you can come away with a little bit of positivity going into next season, or at least into the off season.
Feeling like they took a step forward, at least.
Yeah, right? and I think you could probably finger cross at that point that there might be a reason to, if they haven't already, really approach Kyle Tucker with an extension, because I think if you want pressure on that, I can't imagine the Cubs going to the playoffs, winning the division. Let's say they win 89 games, they win the division, they win a playoff game. They're right in it against the Diamondbacks, who, pitch Corbin Burns and Zach Allen in 2 out of the 3 games. And, the Cubs lose 3-2 or whatever. And then they go into the offseason. Kyle Tucker's had a great season. And then they say, well, the best player the Cubs have had for quite some time. Off you go, Kyle. We didn't even really try to. Then I think you're going to bring all that heat right back on you. So I think if you really want them to go after Kyle Tucker, and I really want them to go after Kyle Tucker, I think Kyle Tucker is a very special talent, that I think that might be maybe your best bet, hoping that they feel that way. They feel that public pressure of like, we can't let this guy go.
100% agree with you. We kind of tied in the last point. We can hit on it briefly, sort of the landscape of the NL Central. I'll just put a bow on it for my end, Jason, and then I'll let you rift away. But the Cubs to me are now in a spot where, and I don't know if I even felt this way last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, certainly not. The Cubs to me are in a spot where when you look around the NL Central, you can confidently look at Milwaukee and say, while they're good, and they're going to probably be good, no one is definitively saying the Brewers are better than the Cubs. No one is saying Cincinnati, wow, they are better than the Cubs. And that to me is why this season gets more emphasis. Obviously, the Kyle Tucker, 1-year deal. You want it to be longer than that. Everyone wants the extension to work out at some point next offseason. And that's, we kick that can down the road to when that pops up. But for this year, it's the first time in a while where, at least for myself, I'm looking around and I'm like, no, the Cubs should just win the division. Like, there is not a team I point at and say they are noticeably and marketably better than the Chicago Cubs. And if it's, close, you brought up some of the flexibility they could have at the trade deadline. A couple of those moves could push the Cubs over the top for this year. And so when I look around the NL Central, I see a Milwaukee team that lost Adames, and that's not only a key bat and a key glove, that is a vocal leader in that clubhouse that they are losing, and that matters. You lost your closer and Devin Williams. I'm assuming they'll turn it over to McGill, but Devin Williams, he was a foundational piece of that bullpen for quite a few years. They're hoping Christian Yelich has sorted out the injury issues, and that the back stuff doesn't pop up again, but there's no guarantee with that. But Milwaukee's going to be there. Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, I still think are a year or two away. St. Louis, to me, is well off the map. So in terms of the NL Central, no team outside of the Cubs with the Kyle Tucker trade made that move that the front office can look towards the fan base and say, look at what we're doing, right? Like, no team made that move except the Cubs, in my opinion, with Kyle Tucker, because yes, you get Nestor Cortez if you're the Brewers, and he'll slot into your rotation somewhere, but you gave up Devin Williams, to make that move. So that's how I'll put a bow on it for my take on the kind of landscape and the look around the division.
I'm going to go back to something you said, which is actually my favorite thing I think anybody said the entire time. You said that, a lot of times we have to kind of talk ourselves into paths to make the playoffs. And I kind of want to go back to that, because I think you hit the nail absolutely on the head. We don't have to talk ourselves into a path this year. I think if the Cubs show up and the Cubs play the way that we think that the Cubs can play, that's the path, right? That's the path to division. And it's not like the last couple of years where it's like, well, if this goes right and this goes right and this goes right, then yeah, maybe at the deadline we can add somebody, we can win 84 wins. And then all of a sudden the team's in the playoffs. We're not talking about that this time. Instead, what we're talking about is, what do the Cubs have to do? They have to stay healthy. They have to play baseball. And if they can do those two things on paper, they're probably the best team. And if the Cubs can do that, if they can keep that on there, that's the path. And so that's kind of my thought. If the Cubs can do what they're supposed to, they can stay relatively healthy in terms of baseball terms, then they're your on paper best team. I think the Cardinals are the bottom, which is crazy to say that, but I don't see a path to where the Cardinals are really making a lot of noise in the division. They might not finish last, but I think they're the least likely to win the division. Even if they're not going to finish last, I don't see a path. The only path that I could see is like Jordan Walker waking up and becoming like the guy that they kind of thought he might've been 2 years ago, but he really hasn't done that. They've lost so much. I think Arenado is going to go at some point throughout the season. Their pitching staff is old. I don't see a path with the Reds, with the Pirates, with the Brewers. You could make an argument where you're like, oh, the Pirates, Paul Skeens and Jared Jones were just so good that the Pirates won 84 games. They brought up a couple of their prospects who happened to be ready, and boom, there you go. Davis started to hit, and the Pirates, youthed their way into the division. The Cubs were hurt, whatever. I do think it's going to be a really fun division. I think the games are going to be really good this year. So if there's, from an entertainment standpoint, I'm excited to watch the Cubs play against any of these teams. I don't think there's going to be an easy series, an easy team to play against, at least on paper. Obviously if Skeens goes down, if Jones goes down, if the Reds pitching staff goes down, obviously we're talking about a different thing there. But on paper, I think there's 4 teams that you could really make an argument that could win the division. I think 2 of those teams, you have to kind of really get the right outcome for the Reds and the Pirates to do that. I can see a scenario where the Brewers do win the division more so than them. And then I think the Cubs are your slight favorites going into it. I wish I was as confident as like the original Zips projection, which had the Cubs like 6 games or like 4 or 5 games above the Brewers. I don't feel that way right now. I could see it happening. I don't think it would be crazy, but as of right now, I would probably go Cubs slight advantage over the Brewers. Reds, Pirates are interchangeable, and then the Cardinals in that 5 spot. Even if the Cardinals end up really is the 4 spot, or I just can't see a path to the division for them. I just don't see one. So I think it'll be a fun year, and I'm excited. I'm the most excited about Cubs baseball that I've been probably 2019 opening day, even more so than 2020 with COVID and the pandemic and everything. I think this is the most excited I've been. And I'm excited to try to watch these the Japan series games at the ridiculous time that they're on, and then again it starts even worse for me. I'm Eastern time zone, so those Arizona games are at 10 o'clock, and yeah. So I think they might be on my spring break. I'm not exactly certain, but there's nothing worse than trying to stay up until midnight and then hang out with a bunch of middle schoolers on the next day. So I'm hoping it's the spring break week.
We're in agreement on the division stuff too, Jason. Great stuff from you today. Appreciate you hopping on. This was the first of hopefully many episodes of the Northside Baseball Podcast. Thanks for tuning in.